You're listening to the Wired for Impact podcast.
I'm here with Dan. Robert, Dan, thanks for taking the time today.
Yeah, appreciate it. Thanks for having me, Peter.
You have quite an incredible story. There's so many of these stories that are out there that are needing to be told and shared, and yours is obviously no exception. But you have had a pretty remarkable journey the last few years. I've heard of some of it, of course, on some of the other podcasts that you've been on and some of our private conversations. But I appreciate you being here today and willing to share, what you've been through and what you're up to now. So thank you.
Of course, man. It's my pleasure. And like I said, in some of our private talks, we said that, it's the only way that we're really going to make like the effects that we need on things. I can lobby and I can make posters and I can do all kinds of different things. But like the truth is like the real human connections and getting to talk like candidly like this is when people really start to relate to things, hear things, and can like process it. So it's really valuable to me to have experiences like this. So again, it means a lot to me.
Awesome. Well, it's interesting as I talk to people about what's going on in the world right now. A lot of times you'll hear people say like, well, what are your sources? What are your sources? Dude, 90% of my sources are you. I'm talking to people. I mean, obviously I have a podcast, but it's like, it's so, there is no one source. It's like, I'm going direct. I'm hearing things from farmers. I'm hearing things from, military vets. I'm hearing things from private investigative journalists. It's like, I had a kid on not too long ago that was a member of Antifa. It's like I'm hearing it directly from the sources. I'm kind of piecing it together. It's an interesting place to be right now in our culture because the media is just so distrusted, and we all sort of second guess each other too. But when you hear it directly from folks, it takes on it has a different gravity to it. So your testimony is a very, very fascinating one given the circumstance. So let's walk people through a little bit. First and foremost, your experience with the military, when you got into it, we'll pick up there. Like what age did you get started and what branch?
So I started not quite right out of high school, but I was probably 20 years old. I did spend like a short stint in college, basically because my parents like begged me. I mean, it was like in the middle of the surge and like everything had just really kicked off in Baghdad again. They're like, dude, please just do anything else except join the army, because they knew I wanted to be infantry too. I was looking for that like door kicker experience. I wanted to do that thing. So I went to college in Maine where I grew up. And then I was doing an EMT program, but low key, I was like, all right, I'll try college, but I'm going to learn a skill that's going to make me a better soldier. So that was 2007. And then finally, after completing that course, I didn't even graduate that year. I had enough. I was living on my own and I was paying for everything on my own. And I was like, I'm living somebody else's dream here. So I basically dropped out of college and joined the Army in the summer of 2007. Went straight into the infantry, had an airborne infantry contract. So finished that up, went to airborne school, went straight to the 82nd, and my first deployment followed just shortly thereafter.
Wow.
So go ahead.
What motivated you to be a door kicker? Like why?
So it's a really weird thing. It's something I was always drawn to. And then it's like, I hate to, infringe on a franchise name, but there's like the actual call of duty, that people feel, thing that pulls people to it. I think one of the biggest things for me is that, I'm still old enough now to remember 9/11. And I was a kid sitting in like, I don't even know, I want to say it was like 8th grade or something like that. But I was sitting in school and I remember us watching the towers get hit, and my teacher that was in the room was actually a reservist. And I remember kind of looking over at him and seeing the panic on his face, and he was like, oh man, this is a pretty big deal. And then a few months later, he was gone. His unit deployed like pretty quick. He's okay as far as I know. Since then, he came back, alive. But then a lot of the seniors in high school, when I started out freshman year, did not make it back. We started seeing, a lot of parades in my hometown and stuff. Guys I knew, guys I went to school with, friends of mine, people like, we've just been, messing around on skateboards a few months earlier, and then they shipped out. They were gone in Afghanistan and getting killed pretty quick. And like that, like I said, I was still young enough that I couldn't go right away, but it hurt. Like I got to see that, and like it's very hard. I know I still have friends now that didn't experience their first funeral even until they were 25, 26 years old for a family member. And, I was going to multiples still in high school.
And you grew up where again?
Portland, Maine.
So there was that many kids from your area that you directly knew that was it just like a military town or?
I mean, so like that many being, even 2 or 3 in a 4-year period, it seems like a lot, And then still other guys getting injured on top of that, add 2, 3 of those. So every year, as like, there's high school graduations, these guys are coming back injured, missing limbs, missing toes, stuff like that, getting to tell their story at our high school graduation. So I had a
Jeez.
constant year to year reminder of at least somebody's story. And our town back then, Portland's a little bit more, it's changed a lot now. I'd say, like, not that this is anti-war inherently, but it's a little more liberal now and just kind of focused on different things. But at the time, it was like, most post 9/11 cities were like uncharacteristically supportive of soldiers and patriotism in a way that it was like very supportive for those guys and gave them a good, healthy place to be, and really built them up. But like I said, I kind of just had that beat into my head for a few years, and I was like, I'm a capable physical young man, like, and this is my generation's war, and I want to be a part of it. And I just never got drawn off by the other stuff. There was plenty of things. I scored very high on my ASVAB. And then they pretty much told me like, hey, whatever you want to do. And they were trying to push me towards like being I don't know, there's like some different correspondence jobs and then like a weatherman, because they're like, oh, you've got good like math scores and stuff. Like you could do anything you wanted. I'm like, good. Yes, I want to do infantry. And even the recruiters are like, all right, let's talk about this again, man. I was like, dude, that's what I want. And originally the contract I wanted wasn't even available. And I backed out. I was like, I mean, okay. And then whenever it's available, I'll be back. And then it was like a very last minute thing at MEPS. They make a couple phone calls. Sergeant Major Susi was his name, comes down and he like unlocks next year's spots for me or whatever. I mean, it's just like, it felt like a used car salesman thing. You take your offer out the door and then they chase you down with one more final offer. That's kind of how it felt. But I got what I wanted out of it. And like I said, shipped out in summer of 2007.
Did you go to Afghanistan right away, or where were you?
So I sat in Fort Bragg for a little bit, and actually this got beat into my head a little worse, right? Because the first thing I did when I arrived, my unit was actually deployed to Baghdad at the time, but they were getting close to coming back. So they actually attached me formally to a funeral detail. So I spent my first few months in the unit traveling all around the U.S. burying the KIAs, and I'm meeting these people. Yeah, it was rough, like a brand new private. And, and I had to listen. It was super hard for me because I didn't have the experience yet because I was a brand new soldier. And there's like this like weird shame thing that comes from young soldiers when you haven't done the job yet, whether you haven't gone overseas yet, because people will thank you and not know what your experience is, but they'll see a uniform and they kind of associate, oh, you do this thing currently, and it's like, I haven't had a chance to prove myself yet. It's a hard thing to deal with psychologically, but I remember one particular funeral. I remember, family members telling me like how much I look like their son, who's the kid in the box, next to me. And I was just like, man, this is really fucking heavy, dude. Like,
That's
and
surprising.
Then shortly after, go ahead.
It's surprising that they would put you in that position right out of the gate. That I would imagine that would entail a lot of maturity and emotional, bandwidth to have to navigate all that. Talk about psychological challenge.
And what I wonder is if I presented it back then. It's hard to know. I'm 35 now. If I presented it back then, or if that's where it came from. Because like everybody grows up quick in the military. At the same time, I have a little bit of a theory that some people stay the age that they joined the military at for their whole career. I mean, some guys they stay high school kids or frat boys for 20 years. And never really grow out of it.
Yeah.
But yeah, so then shortly after that, came back that summer. I earned my expert infantry badge, which is like a series of tasks that you conduct. And if you do them perfectly, then you're like an expert infantryman. It's kind of a big honor to have. It does get you a little bit of chest candy on the uniform and a lot of respect from the senior guys. So that's the best way. Those guys came back. I could earn their respect. So I did what was called True Blue, which means I did everything perfect the first time going through that. Earned a little bit of respect through that thing, and then deployed shortly after in 2008.
In 2008. And so, and then did you deployed to where?
So that was to Ramadi.
Wow.
In Iraq. Yeah.
Okay.
So this is like tail end of, like the time of like the Chris Kyle stories and stuff like that. A lot of that happened in 2007. So Ramadi was on its way back down kinetically. It still wasn't without, incident. But it's not the same as, the Battle of Ramadi that people refer to, but it wasn't exactly Park City either.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Incredible. So let's fast forward a little bit to 2020 or maybe 2019. When did COVID hit and where were you at? Walk us through what happened with that.
So it was a really interesting time for me because in 2019, I had said, all right, I'm going back to take another swing. I was unsuccessful in completing the Q course before, right? And I had made some personal choices that kept me away from it. Very selfish. And I said, I'm going back. I'm gonna get fit. I'm gonna take on selection. And I blew my ACL. I was kind of overtraining, just a freak accident in training. And then I was sitting around for a little while, but I had been a platoon sergeant for 2 years in the 82nd as a staff sergeant, which is kind of like a rank underneath the position that you should have, the rank you should have for that job. And then they changed the way our key development time was rated. So I wasn't going to be able to be promoted on time. So they said, you got a couple options. You can volunteer as a drill sergeant or a recruiter, or you can go back down to being a lower position and get your KD time. So I volunteered as a drill. And then in January of 2020, I shipped out to the Drill Sergeant Academy in Fort Jackson and started training there. And just as we were getting close to the end of training, they're starting to talk about COVID. Hey, there's this weird flu thing that's going around. And then we were like 11 days out from graduating. We had taken our final test, and the last week is just like a refresher on combatives. So it's just our hand-to-hand combat stuff. But I was already certified. So I was like, hey, like they told us there's going to be less physical contact in the school because of this disease now. So they're like, we're not going to do combatives. So we don't know what we're going to do for the last week. And I was like, well, send us home. We finished the last test, like, let us go. And then one day at lunch in March of 2020, they said, they got us in a big formation outside. They're like, hey, you guys have 3 hours to clear the building. You're going to pick up your graduation packets and you have to be gone tonight, or you're going to be on lockdown for the next few months here. Ooh. So we were like, so I don't think I packed, so fast in my entire life. Right. I think I was out of my room in like 26 minutes. Everything was scrubbed and cleaned, and I had pretty much pre-packed most of it already since our training was pretty much done. But then went back to Bragg, and I was kind of chilling in like an admin position there for a little bit, and they kept kicking my orders down the road because they were like, there was like a stop move in the Army. They weren't letting anybody travel. They weren't sure what was going on. Masks were just starting to show up. So everyone was still kind of hesitating to do it at the time. I wasn't seeing it out in public yet. And then I want to say around May, they finally were like, hey, on a Sunday, they're like, you're not going to be shipping out this week. You're going to be waiting another month. And I'm trying to sell a house. Everything's packed up. I'm living out of duffel bags, which is, sort of my situation now. I end up there a lot, and then on Monday morning, they said, hey, your orders got pushed through as an emergency fill because those drill sergeants have been on the trail. We call it the trail for when you're a drill sergeant. They've been on the trail for 3+ years and they're struggling. They need people. So you're getting emergency orders. You need to report to Fort Benning by Wednesday. Mm. So I packed my entire house overnight again and drove down there on a Tuesday. Wednesday morning, I signed in and reported for duty as a drill sergeant at Fort Benning in May of 2020.
In May of 2020. So COVID's already hit. When did the whole vaccine thing start to kick in?
So that was almost all the way into, I guess, the following year. I want to say it was like February. I think they started talking about it. I can't remember the exact time and date that it was like starting to get kicked around. But I had already made a decision at that point. I was like, this doesn't make any sense. It doesn't really fit like categorically the way that we do things. And I've told people before, I'm not necessarily an anti-vaxxer. I'll tell you that after this, I've kind of started to push more in that direction, the more that I've had to force myself to learn.
You're not the only one. Yeah.
Yeah. I've kind of become one, I guess, honestly, at this point. But I mean, I had about 100 anthrax shots. I feel like you just never finish the series, which is funny because that was such a similar case years prior. All my flu shots every year, I did everything I could. I was on a recall unit. So we had a very special set of shots we had to get to be able to deploy to like North Korea or something like that if that came up. So like I said, there was always things in the Army that are ready to deploy to different places.
Oh,
and geez. Like they keep people geared up for that. And that includes like Japanese encephalitis and yellow fever, like vaccinations that I didn't even know at the time if they were approved. But I knew my unit wasn't going there without me. So if that was what we might be called on to do, I stayed ready. Mm-hmm. So that was a talk that had happened at one point that I don't know how much I can actually go into, but just like legally. But then
sorry to interrupt you, but you said that you noticed that things were not the same as they used to do it. What were the differences that you started to pick up on that made it seem like it was a different animal?
So it was the reaction from people. So like it was never like if you were falling behind on your flu shot or something, they'd always be like, hey Rob, you gotta go get your flu shot. And I'd always be like, okay, I'll get around to it. And they're like, okay, we'll just let us know when you do. Like, it was never any stress. But it just like, it seemed like from the get-go, they were like, as soon as this shot's here, like, we are doing a rodeo. Like, everyone in the entire state of Georgia is like going to be there. You don't have a choice. It was just like it was such a heavy-handed implementation. For some reason, they're like, you will get it. You will be here at this time. There are no exemptions. And I'm like, why did you say it that way? Like, it's so like, just like it came across so heavy-handed that I was like, I don't know. It seems like there might be something amiss with this, right? So I start digging into it a little bit. I find 40-562, section 2.6, and it talks about like if you've had.
And sorry, what is that? Explain to the listeners what that is.
So it's basically for everything in the Army that there's rules about. There's either an FM, like a field manual, or a TM, a training manual, or there's some like Department of Defense booklet that outlines all of the current rules and regulations and policies. So 40-562 is actually across all of the services like Air Force, Army, Marine, Coast Guard, right? It uses a different name, but it's chemoprophylaxis is, I think, the word that's on it. But basically, it's like how the military fights disease or handles those sorts of things. And exemptions, meaning that you don't have to participate in a particular part of that program, is covered in section 2.6. So I was like, well, they said no exemptions, but here's this thing that says if I've had it and I have previous positive or serologic blood tests, then I can file for an exemption. And what I didn't like is the rush that everybody had on it. And as I dug, I was like, well, you need like 3 years of human testing for this to be FDA approved. And I'd said that enough times that people were like, dude, it wouldn't be in front of us if it wasn't FDA approved. And I was like, no, you'd think that, but I'm telling you, this seems weird. And not a lot of people wanted to listen to me. And then Lloyd Austin came out with that letter shortly after that. He said, I'm going to implement it, whether it gets approved or not. Basically, I can't remember the exact verbiage, but I still have the letter. Like when you ask for sources, that thing still exists. And I still have a copy somewhere in this box, but,
and real quick, so Lloyd Austin's the Secretary of Defense. So this is essentially coming from top brass. You need to go take this, but it's not adding up to you. What was the pressure like that you were feeling when you were basically saying, this doesn't feel right to me?
So until the mandate actually started, most people were like, well, there'll be consequences. And that's all that anybody really said because they didn't really know. So the pressure wasn't too bad. And I basically got to kind of blow it off for a while. And just continued working. And like, we were still like being a COVID era drill sergeant was tough. Keeping 220 kids healthy, safe, separate, or whatever, like trying to do all that stuff. Even though we know now that most of that stuff wasn't working, these guys were wearing masks on the qual range. And it's like, this is stupid. I mean, it's 25 feet in between each one of them and they're alone on a platform. I'm like, let the kid breathe, so he can shoot accurately. They were like, their standards were dropping because we couldn't take them for runs on the street. So there was no long runs in basic. And when you think of boot camp, you picture people like running in formation and doing that. All of that got deleted for a while. We just stopped doing it. So they're already getting lower training and stuff like that. It was just a lot of stress on drills trying to make it work and make it worth, the students' time. But yeah, once the letter came out and he's like, it hit the market start date or whatever of approval, which was like August 27th, then it got like tremendous very quickly. Because the initial threats were, like dishonorable discharges, which is like not even a reasonable response to that. Like to think that, I would lose like this Wattenberg amendment, like I'm never allowed to own firearms. It's going to be hard to get a job ever again, like all over this shot, especially when there are exemptions. Like I said, it was such a heavy handed response that it kept pushing me further and further away from it, even though there's huge consequences at the time, you know what I mean?
Yeah. So just real quick, the threat of a dishonorable discharge was hanging over you and others who were hesitant to get the jab. And so you're not allowed to have guns, I guess? You can't own firearms after?
If you get a dishonorable, yeah, that's one of the things, that's one of your rights you lose. You're going to lose all your VA benefits. So like me, who has now, I'll be honest, a pretty high VA rating. I've got TBIs. I broke my back on a parachute accident, multiple knee surgeries. I've got a lot that's happened to me. I'd lose all the support for that, and then just be out there still basically dealing with my injuries in the world forever. And then like obviously every job that you go to apply for, they ask for a DD 214. You're stuck explaining to them like, well, this is what happened and whatever, and it disqualifies you from a lot of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
It's almost like having a bankruptcy on your record trying to get a loan.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a pretty devastating threat. I would imagine if you're a career military person.
But
So paint us a picture at that point in time. You're hesitating a little bit. You're getting this top-down pressure. Who's mandating it to you? What's the chain of command there?
I think most of the pressure was felt from about the brigade level down. Just to shape that up, I guess basically all of the basic trainings for the most part on Fort Benning fall under a couple of brigades, and ours was 198. So that's like all your infantry guys and stuff like that. And then there's, I couldn't even tell you how many, maybe 10 basic training battalions. Each of those have 5 companies. Each company is like 220 students. So without doing all the tons of math to make that work in our heads today, brigade had most of the pressure because that's where most of the legal was being handled at the brigade level. There's not really a battalion level legal element. There's not like a battalion JAG. So I think that's why a lot of it came from the brigade, but it was just orders that were coming down. And then they were just like, our company commanders, who's like, there's only 7 to 10 drill sergeants, a first sergeant and a company commander who's a captain. And those two are the ones that basically give you all of your information from those upper levels. So that's kind of where that conversation started with me, was they're saying like, hey, everyone's going to sign this counseling statement. And a counseling statement, really, people use it as a punishment because they can like hold it over your head that there's this record, because multiple counseling statements is just a record of a conversation. But if we have a conversation enough times, they aggregate into a packet that is evidence for a discharge or a punishment. Right. So this is the first thing that comes out, is this counseling statement. Honestly, I was going to say, I just found it when I was packing up the other day and I framed it, but I think I put it in because what happened with this counseling statement is, we pen this thing to death. Like, I was reading it and it said, you'll receive the FDA approved shot. I'm like, oh, easy. Yeah, you don't have it. So yeah, sure. I honestly agreed on the first
It
one.
It wasn't FDA approved.
Correct.
Right.
It wasn't.
So Lloyd Austin, in the letter that he sent out, I remember you saying that the wording was very specific. Do you recall what that wording was?
I can do my best. Basically, it was that you, like all service members, will receive, and it said in compliance with BLA labeling and guidance and FDA approval. So basically, like, as long as it's labeled correctly and is FDA approved, you will get that one. So that was him saying a legal statement. He is allowed to do that. However, that thing didn't exist yet. So what happened was the shadow policy and enforcement underneath it, where people took their own interpretation of that and then crammed it down people's throats. Now, when I say people, was there back channels that the Pentagon was like, I don't care which one they get, make them get it? Pretty much guaranteed,
So at the time, it was not FDA approved, right? And so
correct,
it was saying you need to get it so long as it's FDA approved, but it never was really officially FDA approved. So there was that gray area that you were saying, hey, where's the approval, right?
Yeah, and the way that I kind of liken it to is like what got approved was basically like, you and your wife are about to have a kid, and then a few months ahead you find out the baby's sex, and then you're like, all right, well, let's go with this name or whatever. You kind of kick it back and forth, and you guys decide like, okay, it's going to be Christina, it's going to be Jason or whatever. So you fully decide this is the name that we're going to approve it with, and that's really all that happened. Is they approved the planned label and name of this thing, and that was part of the BLA process. So there was an approved label, but basically the contents of what it was going to go inside still had a testing requirement.
Sorry,
so
which label was approved?
Comirnaty is what it was referred to as. It was kind of like, people pronounce it differently because I don't actually know which way it's supposed to be, but it's supposed to be like a mixture of the words community and immunity. And, like it was some play on words with that. But Comirnaty was going to be the Pfizer vaccine that was approved. So when people heard, oh, the Pfizer vaccine's approved, they kind of just like filled in the gaps with that because anything that's still labeled EUA, whether it's the same formulation or not, is irrelevant. It's labeled EUA. That means it's an emergency use authorization, and you still have a informed consent element. And it's funny because like a lot of the informed consent stuff and like you can't test on people against their will came from the Nuremberg Code.
Right. Yeah, this is pretty shady stuff. Looking back now, for sure, but I can imagine at the time that at the very least, someone like yourself is asking questions. What did people say when you brought up the exemptions, the protocol that you mentioned? What was it again? The section
40-562. Yeah.
That's it. Thank you.
Of course. So what happened was initially I had said that I was like, well, I'm going to be filing for an exemption. And they're like, well, you still have to sign the counseling statement. So the best thing I could do was like, okay, give me a day. Like if they don't need this back right now, and to my commander's credit, in the end, I wouldn't say he protected me fully to see it through, but I would say he did his best job to stall as long as he could. And, in the end, he was going to be forced to make a decision that was going to affect him and the rest of the people, right? Because if he fights this, he gets removed from command too, and then he can protect nobody. So then that happened to a lot of people. So I told them I'm going to be filing for this exemption. That goes up to brigade legal. Brigade legal comes back, no exemptions. That's not what's going to happen. So I was like, okay, I need help. I need help from a real attorney. JAG wasn't helping me, Trial Defense Services. I went and spoke to them and they said, we can't help you until you're formally charged with something. So until they tell you that you're basically in dereliction of duty, then we can't even help you. We can't even get you a representative. You can leave your name and number, and that was it. And guess who to this day I've still never heard from, by the way. So that was the thing. So I decided to seek some legal help on my own. And once the attorneys contacted Brigade Legal, because I used David Wilson, who is an attorney out of Colorado, who is a 26-year Marine Corps JAG attorney with trial experience, which is an important thing to note, especially if we get to it in this talk. The man has actually stood in court and deliberated, in front of a jury even. And most of the JAGs have not done that. They always try to settle out of court, or they play these little games with paperwork, or they deal with exemptions or exceptions. But most of them have never had to actually stand there and defend their point of view legally, or a lot of this would have been different because they just kept taking all these little back roads, and they thought they were going to do that with me. But I had a good legal defense, and he put his foot down pretty quick. And then Brigade was like, okay, we're going to look at this thing. Culture was kind of changing because as I started that, I was given an opportunity very quickly to actually take a lawsuit against the DoD. And now this is the hard part to explain, but were basically a team of attorneys and doctors and people that were willing to donate their time and efforts into this project, and that I was in contact with. And it started with American, it was AFLDS, the frontline doctors.
Okay.
It started with a lot of people from that, and then they kind of took a different road, and these two groups separated. And again, this is not a named group of people. It's just people that worked with them that were like, hey, I still want to represent these service members and do the right thing and help them. So I got to work with that group of attorneys, and they were like, let's take a case. And then, the initial phone call that I talked about in some of the other podcasts happened, and I was able to make like a bigger statement of a legal defense, which there's another exemption for in 40-562, that because I had a pending legal action that I was exempt until it was resolved. Now, and that's the way that myself and my attorneys and everybody basically interpreted it. That's not later the way JAG interpreted it. But what that meant was that it bought me time, because that kind of stuff had to go all the way up to the DOJ. Like it was going all the way up to the Pentagon to get approved. And just, if you've seen how slow things move in the military, like I would write a letter about something, I'd stamp it, I'd give it to my commander. It'd be months, before I heard back on it. And like I said, in that time, things would come back and they'd be trying to pressure me slowly. They're just like, hey, it's not looking like this is going to go through. And I was like, cool, tell me in a very formal setting and tell me the right way, and I will hear what you have to say.
Mm-hmm. You were the first one, if I recall, to push back, correct?
So to push back in a legal defense, people were saying no from the get-go all over. I think what I did was I was the first one to try to give them a unified front in one place to look for that defense. So I was the first one to take legal action, right? Myself and Staff Sergeant Holly Mulvihill, who is a Marine Corps. She was actually a drill instructor as well.
First one in any military branch, or the first one in your company?
Correct.
Or okay.
No, the whole in the DoD period. So Robert V. Austin was the first case to come out, which obviously made a lot of waves. And then shortly thereafter, I was given an opportunity. Todd Callender, another one of my attorneys, said, hey, Dan, I want you to think really seriously about whether you'd want to go on like Fox News and put this out. And at the time I was like, people all over the place are scared and don't know what to do. And then I know the pressure they're feeling, and I know what they're saying is right, and they don't have anybody backing them up. So even though I didn't even have as near as much information as I do now, we didn't even know about the labeling guidance stuff and everything back then. We only knew about the testing requirements. And I knew about some of the games that were being played with the EUA, because if there's an existing medication that can treat something, then the EUA cannot exist. So even the emergency use authorization of this drug never should have happened. And we went on the news, myself and Todd, and we mentioned there's 56 medications that were being suppressed. This is your hydroxychloroquine, ivermectin, that stuff, right? But there's 56 things that can be used to have early treatment, right? And every single one of them, if you mention it, like that's why my interview ended up getting pulled from the internet, I think. But I went on live and I told them, I was like, hey, look, I have had COVID, which I had tested positive with very low symptoms. I was like, easy recovery for me. This is certainly not a life-threatening thing to like a healthy, physically capable, person. I understand other people might have reasons to believe we didn't understand comorbidities yet. This is still very early in the COVID battle.
Mm-hmm.
So without me getting a little bit sidetracked there, they gave me that opportunity. I went on Fox and I got to say it. So that was a big deal because at the time I was kind of watching the DoD's numbers and I was trying to file for class specificity for my case. So I was covering anybody who was similarly situated. And if you look at the way our original case was worded, that's who filed. It was Dan Robert, Holly Mulvey-Hill, and similarly situated individuals. And so that class of plaintiffs was 430,000 service members. And the DoD was on the news saying, oh, yeah, some guys might get kicked, but it's not going to be maybe more than 3,000. And we were like, well, that's a lie. You're talking about almost 500,000 service members. You're talking about over a third of the force right now.
Damn.
That is, like I said, I had to get the information out and tell people like, hey, there's a fight on in your name. Somebody's fighting for you. Somebody cares. You guys are doing the right thing. And that was the best way I could do it, was to just find a mountaintop and scream it. And then, we kind of went from there.
Talk about Call of Duty. I mean, it's such an interesting dynamic and quite an interesting pivot point for you to initially sign up to serve your country on behalf of your country. At least that was your thinking at the time, to now having to fight essentially your own brass that's telling you to do something against your will. What was that like?
So it's interesting because I joined the Army thinking I was going to be a door kicker, right? And not that I didn't get to do the things that I signed up for. I checked pretty much every block that I wanted, right? Mm-hmm. Over, a 13-year career. So, just under 13. But I got to check all those blocks. But what's interesting is I started finding myself as a leader in almost a spiritual war, and like people trying to preserve their mental health and decisions and their values personally. And I try to tell them that this is a bigger deal. And it's interesting because as a platoon sergeant in the 82nd, I was a very effective leader. Not trying to just toot my own horn here, but I have multiple accolades. I have a wall of things and gifts and things that I was awarded for being really good at my job. And some of this stuff is thank yous from soldiers that I served with. There's a whole rifle up on the top of this thing that was engraved and gifted to me from my platoon as a thank you. I think I was in good standing with that place, but I was in a really dark place in my life. I was going through my second divorce at the time, and I was really kind of lost. I was kind of dealing with some addiction issues, just alcohol. I say just, but it's such a terrible thing on its own. And I was just kind of lost for purpose early on when I became a platoon sergeant. And I re-enlisted and went to jump master school. And I had said, I'm going to reinvest myself in the Army, and I'm going to make this my life. I'm going to find purpose in my life through the Army because I needed something to focus on at the time. I was in such a bad spot. So in 2018, when I took that platoon, the guidance the platoon sergeant gave me when I took over was take care of the men and you'll never be wrong. And I'll tell you, from the moment that he told me that, that was that is such a pivotal point in the person that Dan Robert is and became and still is, So anytime I was the way people would pray for guidance, I would sit down and think on it, and I'd say, what really is taking care of the men? And, is that the easiest thing to do all the time? No. Is it the thing that they want to hear all the time? Definitely not. So I just kind of had to fight this little spiritual war with myself constantly, trying to let that be the guidance. And then people started reaching out and telling me hey, you've really helped me a lot. You helped me feel like I'm not crazy. I didn't think there was a chance we were going to get dishonorable discharge and lose everything. But all the calls that I got of people that told me that I kept a gun out of their mouth, I knew I was dude, you're on the right path. This is 100% where you need to be. I was okay, so if me just talking and letting them know they have rights saves more lives than this supposed bullshit vaccine will. I was like, then I have to do it. Like, and it just became like, I became obsessed with just keeping the numbers up for those people's sake. At the time, did I really care if people got the shot or not? No, because I didn't really understand how dangerous it was. What I cared about was whether they made the decision on their own or not. And it
Right.
was that element of force, that they could, like I said, preserve, their values, feel good about it. If they're like, hey, I understand, and this is a job I'm trying to do, and this is a requirement, I'm okay doing it. I'm going to do it, and then I'm going to move on and stay in my career. At the time, I was like, okay, as long as you're making that decision. But I mean, people were getting closed door conversations with doctors and their leadership and whoever else or whatever, and they were these guys are being threatened. So in the military you have like an execution order. This is like, hey, this is how we're going forward with this. Any change to that is called a fragmentation order, or a frago. So frago 1 or 5 came out, I don't remember, because it's like not everything gets published in the order that they're numbered. Right. So Frago 5 came out, and I want to say that it said commanders could use the minimum amount of force necessary to enforce involuntary vaccination. So
What does that mean?
that means you can hold your soldiers down.
Yeah, what the fuck?
Involuntary is like, you know what I mean? Like you're
Yeah.
like,
I was gonna
like, yeah.
Dude, that's
So
crazy. I had
intense.
Dr. Sam Sigaloff on the podcast a little while ago, and it sounds very similar to what he experienced, where it was like, I just want to give people, the right to choose freely. And it sounds like you were just essentially drawing a boundary and taking care of your men in that way. What do you think gave you the discernment to see that this was a spiritual battle? Why did you see it and maybe others didn't?
I guess because it's all timing, right? There was, just prior to having the opportunity to meet these doctors and stuff, I was, like I said, I was still struggling with sobriety, even as a drill sergeant. I mean, and we're talking 13-day work weeks and sometimes 18-hour days. And I was still coming home and polishing off a half to a fifth of bourbon almost every night.
Wow.
I think I was totaling it somewhere around $700 a month. I was drinking up, and that is not money I had to spare, but I was doing it. Again, still very effective, and through most of my career as a paratrooper, I could be, but it was starting to really wear on me as a drill sergeant when it's 3 o'clock in the morning and you're standing on a 5 foot tall PT stand in front of 200 people, and you've got to do exercises and scream, and you're trying to not let your migraine split your face open or throw up. So I was in that kind of a bad spot. Like I said, still just a lot of pressure that stuff was getting to me, but I wanted to get sober. So I had enrolled in SUDC, which is the Army's substance abuse and counseling program. But when you self-enroll, they don't tell you to stop drinking. They say you should, but they don't hold you accountable for it. Whereas if a commander refers to you, you have to stop. So they were like, it was January, I enrolled, and then they said, hey, we'll get to you. There's a lot of carryovers of people failing drug tests from Christmas leave. So we'll be able to talk to you and get you in sometime in April or May. I was like, I'm asking for help right now. And you said, yeah, we'll see you in 5 months. I'm like, man, I hope I'm still alive. So I kind of go through this. I had to detox on my own without meds. I had to take a very, very difficult road to do that, which put me in the hospital a couple of times. And like almost nobody knew about what I was going through, except those really close to me, trying to detox and stuff like that. And then I made it to a point where I finally got a sober streak. 10 days into my sober streak, I crashed my motorcycle going like 50 plus miles per hour, right? I break a rib, I shatter this hand, snap my fingers. I got road rash all over the place, and I had already torn an ACL again prior. And then I'm banged up and I'm ripping across the ground. And as I'm getting put into the ambulance, they had asked me if I'd had anything to drink that night, and when I said no, like even now it's like emotional. I broke down, man. I was just starting to bawl my eyes out. I was like, man, the first time in years I can say this, and I was like, something protected me that night, because it was like, had I not been sober, I probably would have been going 100. I mean, it's a pretty big Harley, man. And I was like, I was not known for, taking it, just I just want to cruise, man. I wasn't one of those guys. Like, I like to get on it and I get a straightaway. I pin it back and just let it rip, and it might have been one of those nights. And there's no way I was going to come back from a 100-mile-per-hour crash. But one of those nights, maybe just a little bit better reaction time, and it kept me alive and I got to like feel that way. So then I was still dealing with like, I guess people were starting to talk to me about protection from like an angelic or spiritual guidance or something, right? Everyone's got their version of that they wanted to talk to me about. But then they said, hey, careful, because like as the closer you get to the light, living in a good path, things are going to try to steer you off. So I'm in a ton of pain. And so what does the hospital do? Yeah, you're in substance abuse counseling. Here's 7 bottles of Oxy, right? So like, and I'm trying to balance like, man, I'm in a lot of pain and I don't know how to go through this. But like, I was already in the middle of my own spiritual war of trying to find like, purpose in my life and stuff we talked about, and then trying to stay on my feet and do the right thing. And I had already kind of had it in my head that, basically in my years as a platoon sergeant, when it came to decision making, I was very cold because I had to be. If I was as emotionally open or empathetic as I am now, it would have been very difficult to make decisions as like a combat leader. And then getting to like this little reset and empathy and a little bit more, I guess, appreciation for my own life. I was already in the middle of, like I said, finding more value in like, a belief system or my values or like spirituality, and like, as I saw, those are the things that they were putting pressure on and twisting in people, to me, that was them in counseling with Oxy being handed to them or forced down their throat. Hey, you're either going to suffer immensely, like dishonorable discharge, broken ribs, right? Or you're going to get the relief you need, which is this thing that you don't want to do, is going to corrupt your path you're on, but you won't be in pain anymore. And that's where you stay in the Army. And I just saw like a very closeness to that. And honestly, it took years for me to process that. But at the time I just saw how they were being manipulated. And I was like, I had to try to put them in a better place to fight from. As I don't know what gave me the strength to do it, honestly, because, even when we started that case, I was still on crutches with a broken hand, it's like not exactly in fit to fight, type of position to be like, dude, you're already busted up. You can't even walk. And I'm like, yeah, let's fight the government, man. It's like,
jeez. Yeah, as if you didn't have enough already on your plate. Was the drinking something that came after you joined the military?
Oh, yeah. Yep, for sure. Honestly, it's hard, especially the 82nd has a stigma about it that you're either going to, it's a lifestyle that pre-exists prior to you getting there, and you're either going to fall into it when you get there, or you're going to, maybe guys get married young, don't live in the barracks, and they get away from it a little bit. And that's kind of one of the only ways, unless you're like on a hard path, like you came from like an LDS background or something. Like most people like usually spend a little bit of time dealing with alcohol abuse in the military, especially the infantry. I mean, you pretty much show up your first night in the barracks and they're like, hey, new guy, what's up? Here's a beer. Come over. Let's play Call of Duty. Let's hang out. Like, I mean, even the guys that are underage, you know what I mean? It's just like the culture for everything. And then it's there. We celebrate it so much. I mean, if you ever heard of a grog ceremony in the military, like even at a battalion ball, if you were to look into that at all, you'd see that pretty much, we're celebrating just, our history, and that each part of our history is dedicated to a bottle of liquor, and it all gets poured into this giant cauldron that we all then scoop and drink from. And it's just like, I mean, this thing is absolutely just liquid death. It'll put you down. So it's like, but we celebrate it. And that's like, a thing that we do frequently. And then, for everything that you do, a hail and farewell, it's like, there's a reason to drink. Somebody goes away, somebody's new to the unit. We drink, we celebrate. I was welcome to the unit with a pint glass that's engraved with the unit's logo. And when I was farewelled from the unit, it was a whole pitcher, And the idea, I think, was supposed to be that you now have friends to drink with. But instead it became a joke about my tolerance level, at that point.
Right.
So, but it's like, it's just such an ingrained culture. And then I'll tell you the truth. And this is, again, I think this is more connected to like the spiritual side of me. I did not expect to make it back from that deployment to Ramadi. I kind of, at a certain point, I remember talking to my mom on the phone, and she was an OR nurse. And she had said I was like completely a shell, and the stuff I was saying to her that I was just saying with no emotion, and I had nothing inside of me talking to her. And she was very concerned about it, but she also understood. She's like, yeah, I know where you are, and I just hope you make it back and you can have time to heal,
Wow.
But I didn't expect to make it back. And, I mean, to the point where every day I was just completely shut down, going outside the wire, doing the stuff we were, that even on the plane ride home at the end of the deployment, I was like, oh, plane's going to crash, man. And I'll land in the ocean and I don't need a plan and it's totally cool, dude. Like, so
Wow.
yeah, cause I'm already dead. So when I did make it back, and I remember landing at Green Ramp and then seeing my wife at the time, you know, with her sign standing outside, and I hadn't seen her in a year, a little over. Um, it just kind of hit me that I was like, oh man, I have no plan. And I got out of the Army shortly thereafter because she kind of pulled me towards that direction. She's like, I don't want to do this again. And I had unfinished business. I had stuff I still wanted to try to do in the Army if I was going to stay, but then I had no purpose. And I got out for a little bit in 2010. And I just like, the whole time I was just a shell and dead inside and didn't have, you know, anything to look forward to. But I'll tell you, that's like, that was a really hard thing, is not having like not having plans for the future. And I started living very in the moment because I didn't think I was ever going to make it. That idea that I could die any day held on to me up until probably 2021, you know, like, so that's when I was like, yeah, I'm going to black out tonight. Yeah, I'm going to spend a bunch of money on something I don't need. Yeah. And even after the divorces and stuff, it became like periods of promiscuity or whatever, like things that I was, no matter what, just like living in the moment to the point where it didn't matter because you're dead anyway. And that's where I lived for a really long time. You know, and you spend 10 years doing that, and it's a very hard thing to kick.
Yeah. Would you say that that was more a derivative of the drinking or more of the, just some of the shit that you dealt with in theater with the military?
Perfect storm. It was all the things, combination. So like, it was already an easy road that was given to me.
Yeah.
And then, yeah, so that was the easy answer for me, because it was like, I couldn't sit and deal with things inside my own head. That was a way to be numb and like just remember good times. And a lot of the times, like, I don't miss the military, but you miss the people. And when I look back, what was most of our activities and things we did, you know, stateside, was partying and stuff. And it gave me a way to just like be very numb to the things I didn't want to feel, and gave me a chance to feel a little bit of relief and reminder of like the good times with those people.
Yeah. I have some follow-up questions for you on the spiritual journey, but if we could pause that for a second and go back to the vaccine, explain what happened when you did a FOIA request, because I think that's fascinating.
Which part were you talking about? About the records?
Yeah, and basically what you found out when you submitted the FOIA request, you found out how far up the chain of command that went, and from what I understand in your story, that was, you know, quite alarming. That apparently it went all the way up to the Pentagon, and that they were looking into your behavior, and again another indicator that something was different about this one than maybe the past vaccines.
Yeah, so there's a mixture of information that gave me all of that data, but I'll tell you, so the one thing that David Wilson was able to do for me, as well as Dale Saran, was write a letter saying to the commander, like, hey, this is as it stands. The shot does not exist. The FDA approved one. You do not have it. This is how EUAs work. And at the end of the paper, it said, like, so are you ordering me to get the EUA shot? Yes or no? Are you ordering me to get the FDA shot? Yes or no? And then a signature block. I gave it to my commander, and I just put him in kind of on the spot. And I was like, hey, you know, this is from my attorney, and I need an answer on this. And I told him it doesn't have to be you. I was like, if this goes up to the JAG or brigade commander or somebody over me needs to answer this question. And I, you know, very much put my foot down. I was like, I will not budge until I have an answer on this question.
Good for you.
So he scans it up to brigade, and then it starts going up through the chain. And I knew that I was like, all I really needed this to do is just get scanned in, and then I can FOIA request the email chain. I can see where it went. I can request anything that has to do with like RE admin COVID or anything like that. You just have to be very specific on your request. And I had submitted a couple and was unsuccessful, but the attorneys were able to pull a little bit of information. And what they saw was that letter went all the way up to the DOJ and the Pentagon. They called it OTJAG. So basically it is the judge advocate, like all the way at the top of the food chain. These are all the highest ranking attorneys in the military, period. Right. So this is who's going to go to court for like Lloyd Austin. Right. So these are the JAGs that are making decisions for everybody. And they saw that it went all the way up there. But I'll tell you, I already knew that beforehand because they called my commander all the way down on his cell phone right after the Fox News thing. And they basically, and to this day, you know, I watched him hang his head and tell me about the phone call. And he's like, I heard from somebody I thought I would never talk to and hope I never have to talk to again. But he wouldn't tell me who it was. He said, maybe someday when this is all over, we can, you know, kind of tell the rest of this story. But they were calling down and they wanted to know everything I was doing. You know, where was I? Was I talking to my privates about this? Was I like out there like, kids, you don't have to take the shot? You know, they wanted to know what I was doing, or just like every minute of the day. So there's that. FOIA request just showed the email chain. It came back down. My commander addressed me again with it and just gave it back to me. And he was told that he was advised not to sign it and that his job would be over very quickly if he did. And I don't know if that was a threat from them or them admitting like, yeah, this paper's dangerous, because it was, and that was the point. You know, that was me pointing a legal gun back at them. And that was one of the only successful FOIAs that I actually had, was just that email chain. And then after that, the rest of the information, honestly, I'll tell you, like, and I can't be too specific about where it came from. Some of these people are still in, is that people leaked me stuff. People deep inside different parts. So when I spoke on the other podcast about how the G2, basically like where all the generals are on Fort Benning, was having those meetings to get rid of me, a person that was in that meeting made a personal phone call to a close friend of mine to deliver that information in person, because they didn't want a record of them contacting me directly. But they knew it was somebody that worked with me, and they're like, well, we can let him know what's going on, get this over to him, and let him know, like, hey, they're headhunting hard up here. We had a meeting and you're doing everything right, so nobody can come after you. And they said, nope, go back, find something, try again in a couple of weeks. So they just like, even though they had the answer that like I was doing the right thing, that was not a good enough answer for them. They wanted me gone.
Why do you think that they wanted you gone?
Well, so there's an interesting thing, right? Like the military industrial complex, it runs in very good old boys club circles, right? And the big part of like generals that are high ranking positions are already in bed with like DoD contractors and stuff like Halliburton, Raytheon, stuff like that. And they're being promised board positions when they get out. So they start, I scratch your back, you scratch mine. We pull this product, this gets issued to the dudes, like whatever. That stuff happens. And that's a major part of what the Pentagon does. Like the military is not broadly run all from the Pentagon. That's not some master command center where every decision is made. There are satellites of leadership all throughout the country that decisions are made, but it is the central part of the military industrial complex, which is just the integration of what is a civilian market into the money of the government. So I think that some of those positions had certain requirements, and I think that generals over their heads were being told like, hey, I need you to make this happen, or you need to deal with this thing, or don't let this happen, and anything gets in the way of it, crush it. And maybe it wasn't as specific to me at the time as it was just like, hey, enforce this COVID thing, make it happen, because it was making a lot of people money. A lot of people had stocks in the fact that the military was, mandating something. So they knew like, well, here's a guaranteed expenditure that's going to happen. It's going to cost a lot of money. There's a lot of people in the military, multiple shots over multiple years, plus every subsequent service member that comes in. I mean, talk about passive income, man. Like,
yeah. So, I mean, I hate to think that was a main driver. I mean, I would agree that probably was very likely, but man, what a shitty thing to have to push back against and have to, talk about a spiritual battle, and also just the practicality of, fuck, if I get, dishonorably discharged, how's that going to affect my career? How's that going to affect my life? You're dealing
your
with
family, your kids,
substance abuse. Yeah.
Wow. And on top of that, like there's other guys, man, that like, as I hit a period where I burned out super hard with it, because I was going to physical therapy 3 times a week, plus like all my other, I remember there was a point when I had an appointment every day of the week for like months in a row. I was training privates, 3:00 in the morning, I'm out there on the stand, I'm doing something, and then I'm going to physical therapy, I'm kicking around in the pool, and then I'm going back for a night range. And then on a little bit of time in between, I'm sitting on email or Zoom call with attorneys and trying to make stuff happen. And then on top of that, the tens of thousands of service members that were getting in touch with me periodically, or guys that were just calling, reaching out. I mean, I had people calling our staff duty desk trying to get a hold of me because they couldn't figure out who I was personally. So like all the time, staff duty's calling me. They're like, hey, some Sergeant First Class is on the phone for you. And I'm like, oh my God, what is this now? Like thinking this is like some JAG thing or like CID. Go down there and talk to them. And then somebody's like, hey, man, I just didn't know how to reach you. Or they'd find me in Global, which is basically like the phone book for military emails. They'd find me in Global, and then like my email got flooded. And then I got audited multiple times. I'd get locked out of my email. I wasn't allowed to read my own military like work email, which includes like, our ATARs or schools accounts, everything. I couldn't even do my job because it was locked out being audited. So somebody was panning through what was I telling people. And I think that started with the religious exemptions. A team of people kind of came together, and one female soldier specifically helped me write a religious exemption template. And the template was based off of one that had been approved several years prior from a chief warrant officer that had an exemption long before we even knew what the word COVID was. It was based off of a religious, the use of like fetal cell lines in the research. Even if there are not fetal cells used in the vaccine, if it's used in the research, it's still, can be
Acceptable. Yeah.
So this group of people helped me write this thing. And then I started sending out the template. People ask me like, hey, I don't know how to write a religious template. And it's kind of like how taxes work, because like how the IRS tells you, hey, you owe us, you ask them how much, and they say, I don't know, figure it out. Good luck. If you get it wrong, you go to jail. Yeah. So that's how the religious exemption was. They're like, hey, are you going to submit a religious exemption? And people are like, well, how do I do that? And the Army's like, I don't know, figure it out. If you get it wrong, you're discharged, right? Yeah. So like, I was like, I'm going to help people. I'm just going to give them a template. I'm going to explain how it works. I will not walk them through it. I'm not going to tell them what to put where. I was going to say, paragraph 5 was like, this has to be of your own belief. And I highlighted it in yellow on the thing. And I was like, make sure this is your own statement about why you feel you should be exempt from this thing. I was like, do not copy and paste this. I was like, because it's not sincere. Mm-hmm. So it's interesting because, I had even chaplains in USASOC, like the entire Special Operations Command, calling me, and they're like, hey, are you this guy? How do I get religious exemptions pushed through? I want to help my guys, but I have no idea. And I was like, man, sir, I would call you, like I was going to ask you for the same kind of guidance, especially at your level, and nobody knew. So I gave them the template, and they started pushing it too. And I think that was, again, we tap on the spiritual war thing. One of the biggest triggers of like, them tearing into me was the religious exemptions. Like I try to tell them their beliefs are sincere and they do matter and they are lawful and they're doing the right thing and they're allowed to feel that way and they're correct. And man, I was severely attacked for it,
Can you recall some of those attacks?
Basically, the way that after that point, somebody in MARSOC even had slipped basically some information out to the network that made it back to me, that MARSOC had put together a task force to investigate anybody I'd spoken with. And it was after that started. So what I'm saying is like, we're doing like internal investigations, and we're saying audit is like a cute word for like, like this is a case that somebody was building against me using the Department of Defense budget, and like illegally investigating an American citizen that was not a threat, no warrants. They were pulling everything they could against me. And then there's different news articles and stuff. People were getting information out. And I remember a couple Colorado newspapers like using my name, saying that I was a part of a team of Nazi doctors and stuff. Like basically like my name was getting kind of squashed everywhere. Anything I was putting out on like TikTok or Instagram was getting smashed quickly. People were reporting it for like child grooming, because they know if you click it, it gets taken down immediately. And then it gets investigated later and it might go up. But if you report anything like that, it comes off the internet immediately. So without like a forward investigation, which it should, I think that's appropriate. But they're basically like, crying wolf on my stuff because they knew they could get it eliminated. So who was doing that? You know what I mean? There was that stuff all the way up until, I don't know how much time we have, but if you wanted to get into the DMED data stuff, that's when like the phone taps and stuff started.
Yeah, let's share that if you would, please, because I think that is a big part of this story.
Okay. So, and I don't know if you were able to dig up more information on it from the attorney's letters and stuff, because all of my information came from the attorneys when people ask my source on that stuff. But so after we got a hold of what is basically an internal VAERS system for the military exclusively. And I say that with this note, the DMED data is all of the injuries military wide, right? So there's people that lose a tooth in training. It's in here if that's not COVID or COVID vaccine related. However, what we were able to discern from it was fluctuations in the injuries that we believe were coming from, that we thought were going to happen with this vaccine based off the original Pfizer trials. Like people are having myocarditis, like infertility problems, like things like that, menstrual cycle interruptions, like people are having miscarriages, and then like a crazy increase in cancer. So when we look at the data, all of those things spiked like crazy, 500,000%, So I was like, while this is military wide, why did just these things start in just the first 9 months of 2021? And we watched, those numbers were absolutely wild. So we gathered that up and the SEC stuff from some of the generals, including Lloyd Austin, who is retired general, but is the Secretary of Defense, for his stocks and stuff. And then we made a 21-page slideshow. So when I say we, at this point, I had coordinated with almost all of the military meme pages on the internet. Wildly successful, network for getting stuff out. And, there's a little bit of bullshit that comes in there and some fake profiles, and there's CID messing with it. So you got to kind of, tread carefully. But we all kind of worked together to pull information because everybody was kind of whistleblowing to us because they didn't know another way to get in touch with us. So Instagram and like these meme pages, Terminal CWO, which I don't know if you've seen the stuff that has gone up recently about him. So they were pulling all this information at us. So we put together this really professional slideshow. We were in touch with several people on the Hill, right, in DC. And they're saying, you get this to us, and I'm going to put it in the hands of the House Armed Services Committee. I'm going to put it in the hands of all these congressmen, and you're going to like have whistleblower protection. And like, basically like, this is how we're going to protect you. And we're going to get this information out, and we're going to put a stop to this because we're going to show them what's really going on. People are getting hurt, and people are getting rich off people getting hurt. And it's not helping. So like, here's their main facts. We put the whole thing together, send that up to Congress. And like, it was like within days of that, I want to say even just prior, we had Colonel Teresa Long had sent it to my attorney, and my case got dismissed for the first time. So even when I did the whistleblower thing, I did not have a case at the time. It had been thrown out. Now they've since, I guess, published a letter that had given some reason for why. I don't know if it was a jurisdiction question or whatever, but it was like very sudden. And I'm sorry to jump around on the timeline of this. There's so much to recall.
I know.
Yeah. So, and we leaked that. They crushed my case. And then I said, we're going forward with this anyway. They need to know. And this is like, to me, it's a Hail Mary pass. Like, this is the last chance because I don't have the protection anymore. I'd already been told by my commander that like, you don't have protection now. You're going to have to go get the shot, right? So we leaked this stuff up there, and then like weird stuff starts happening. Like we're all getting like alerts on our Apple, like iClouds are being hacked and stuff like that. Like there's echoes in my phone calls. My battery is burning up. I'm killing a phone in 4 hours. It's like, it's hot all the time. Everything I do, all my texts are like lagging and sending. So I reach out into the community and I talk to like some people in civil affairs psyops and some of the SEAL guys. And I was just like, hey, how do I find out if my phone's being tapped? And they start telling us, they're like, no, you're 100%. You guys are all being monitored. So when I start talking to the attorneys about this stuff from a burner phone and stuff, trying to get around everything I say to my attorneys being captured and used against me by the DOJ, who's obviously listening. I'm like, this is like me playing poker with a mirror behind me, man. You know what I mean? Like I said, there's nothing I can do that they're not getting an advantage. It's how it felt. And it doesn't change the cards in my hand. I still have to play them, and even if they know it's coming. So I talked to them, and Todd Callender was the one that told me like, hey, Dan, this is what it's looking like. I've been talking to some people, but like he couldn't give me a formal letter saying it. But he's like, it's looking like this is how it was thrown out, is that you guys were identified as like basically a national security threat. And that was like, there was some public statements made about that because there was a couple of angles they took. One, they were saying that we were basically starting an insurgency in the military. That's how some of the verbiage went. And then the other stuff was that like, hey, we're putting out to the world that America's military is like sick and dying now. So like that could embolden, some of our enemies and provoke an attack, So that's like the other angle it was taking. So they're saying that what we're putting out there is like an Edward Snowden situation where like, even though it was the right thing to do, you were not allowed to put this stuff out. We started having to live it was like a shitty, Cold War spy movie all of a sudden. Like anything we wanted to get to the attorneys had to, and I mentioned this in one of the other podcasts, like I literally was doing surveillance detection routes to everything. And people were still reaching out wanting to meet me, right? So some Start First class is calling me, hey, can you meet me at this place? I'd like to talk to you in person. And I'd send somebody there immediately, and they would sweep the area, and they're like looking for, a police van or something like all the time. Or like I would change the location at the last second to get them away from whatever could have been set up. Or like I would purposely take my motorcycle because I could take it. And yeah, even after the crash, I fixed it in 41 days, and I fixed my bike and I got back on it. I would purposely take it because that's a much harder vehicle to block. I could pop a curb and go somewhere else, and like We were that worried about it because we knew that many eyes were on us. I even would drive around for 2 hours, just surveillance detection route, like hit all the skills the military gave us how to do, right? And then I was like leaving dead drops to give papers to somebody else to email to my attorney. It's the only way. It's the only way we were getting it through without them seeing. And like I said, don't forget, still going to physical therapy, still a drill sergeant, like still. I mean, this crushed a marriage of mine. This is what tore that apart. Is that all the stress and everything. Some of our whistleblowers started getting arrested because they leaked the inventory ordering system for like Fort Benning, for example. They said like, hey, when we try to order Comirnaty, it tells us that it's not even in production or available. And I still have those screenshots and printouts from that inventory system. But they leaked that stuff out to the news and to like in the case and everything. And like CID showed up and arrested, like handcuffed these people, took their laptops, took their phones.
Because I'm not fully understanding, because there was no inventory. How do you mean?
We leaked that inventory system and proved that they had already started kicking people out for something that they told them they have to take that they didn't have and could not order. So it wasn't even in production. So when you try to order it, like you get on a catalog to order vaccines into Fort Benning, Comirnaty was not even listed. And then if you do get the NDC number that was on the approval, it says that it's not even in production yet. So I'm like, okay, well, I'm like, that's all the proof that I need right there. Again, another slam dunk. And I just kept thinking I was getting these slam dunks. And I'm like, this is over, dude. I just proved it. And there's people that are already getting kicked and there's people that are flagged and like their careers are already changing. So I thought we could prove that, but then, like I said, whistleblowers started getting arrested, and I started, every night before I'm going to bed, I'm sitting there and talking to my wife, and then she's like, "So are they coming here? Like, is somebody going to kick in our door? Like, are they going to shoot our fucking dog? Like she doesn't know." And I was like, "Hey, look, just if that happens, like, just turn all the lights on the best you can." And I started putting cameras up inside my house, and through some guidance, through some other people that work in three-letter agencies, they were like, "Dude, if that comes to it, like the best thing you can do is win in court, just survive the raid. So I'm worried about, because I can't tell her get up and run to the bathroom, because like if you were coming into somebody's house and you saw that, I mean, there's a couple ways that can go. I don't know what you're running for, And I was like, so I said, just get the lights on and just comply. And so that's how I'm saying goodnight to my wife every night. Like,
Jeez.
and that's what I'm saying is like it just took such a toll on us. She just couldn't be a part of it anymore, and it wasn't going to go on forever. But of course, that like a bad brake line I replaced, then all the pressure starts blowing everywhere else in the vehicle, and that kind of tore us apart.
I'm sorry to hear that, man. Sad, shitty situation. I so appreciate you sharing all of this, because it helps people better understand the collateral damage it's ruining people's lives. It's affecting people's careers, obviously, your sanity, the substance abuse, all of that kind of stuff. All these things are obviously related. I guess my next question is who do you want to play you when this turns into a movie? Because holy shit, this is
what's funny is whenever I do cut a goatee, I think there's a striking resemblance to Shia LaBeouf. So maybe that one's a good one to go in.
Okay, I can see that. I can see that.
Well, it's hard because, like, man, I still feel like I gave you just the surface,
the tip of the iceberg. I know.
Story. Yeah.
You and I spoke the other day, and I think it was close to 2 hours that went by in a heartbeat, and you were still like, there's a lot more I haven't told you yet. So we'll have to maybe do another call or two even. But what's the status of your case right now? Let's tie that loose end up a little bit.
So this is really interesting because they deliberated. The last time it went to trial was November 18th of 2022, and I retired officially on November 22nd. Now, they thought they were going to get rid of me quickly, and finally, like, all the holds and flags and stuff, everything came off. And like all of a sudden they're like, Robert is clear him, get him out of the army. And that came from somewhere in between, because once that got approved and I was like getting ready to leave, then the Pentagon's calling again. And they're like, how is Robert still in the army? How did he not get kicked? We thought we told you to handle this. So there is somebody somewhere in between that works some magic and kept a little bit of cover over me, just enough time to let my medical retirement get pushed through. And I'll never know the truth. So my company commander had a piece of that, but there had to be somewhere in between where that never got communicated past brigade. I have some theories about that. We could touch some other time, but so I retired just after the case. So the case goes to court. David and Todd are physically there. It's heard in 10th Circuit which I think is in Colorado. I can't remember. But they get heard in 10th Circuit. Judges are not necessarily playing ball with them. They come out and they're like, hey, we don't necessarily know all this is true or whatever. This is the exact information and how this works legal. It's going to take some research, but we'll get you to a decision. So we sit on it, and that was in November last year. And I only heard from them like 5 weeks ago, maybe not even. They finally got a decision back to us, and they said, basically, we're dismissing it at this level because what they told my attorney, I haven't seen the paperwork on this, what I told my attorney, and he called me and said was that basically you're saying things in this case that we're not even the jurisdiction to decide on. And some of that has to do with, I have a screenshot of it. It was a 1996 case that said that if you volunteer in a program where it edits your DNA, basically off of a medication, that you basically are research property of that, company. And I think what Todd had asked in court was, he said, based off this Supreme Court decision in 1996, did you surrender the entire DOD to Pfizer, basically? Like, are they now property of these people because they're all test property because their DNA has been edited by your research? And they were just kind of like, we're going to have to figure it out. So that leads into, because of the lies about it and how they were forced to do it or forced to make a decision, that it's like a Nuremberg violation, right? So these are human rights violations that we're talking about at this level. And the way Todd explained it to me is that is not the court to decide that. He said, if we're going to get a decision, this has to go to the Supreme Court. So right now, the case, like I said, I don't know if it's formally dismissed or just ruled against us. I'm not actually sure what the verbiage was on it. Have you looked into it by any chance?
No, I want to, though, because, talk about spiritual warfare. I mean, this is spiritual rape. Like, that is what that is.
Yeah.
Because people did not know what that was. They changed the definition of vaccination along, in process. We all thought it meant what we grew up having. It meant that you're going to get a little dose of the virus, your immune system's going to kick in, you're going to develop antibodies. We all thought it was that. A lot of us did anyway. But this was, there's obviously something else going on here. What have you learned in all this? How have you grown?
Man, what a good question. You got another hour free.
I know, right?
Yeah. So, I mean, honestly, it pulled me, I had to break a lot of I want to say conditioning. There's like operant conditioning, and then there's like stuff that just like through years, I just kind of grown to believe because it's how we've always done things. I really broke away from dependence on the system. And I don't mean that I'm living off of all organic food I'm growing on my balcony on the 6th floor out here. I mean that I don't depend on them for anything spiritually or information wise or whatever. Like, at the same time, like, I do try to discern things for myself or get good, like, firsthand knowledge and just not get distracted by anything else. Basically, I don't know. It kind of came out to be like everything's a lie, So like, or everything has somebody's perception on it. And it's just like, don't take anything at face value. And that, like, there is a message that I gained basically in resiliency and like the human spirit, because like I had to step away because, like, again, psychologically, I was crashing so hard when I retired. Like that weekend, I disappeared out into the desert and I actually shot a 2-gun PCSL match out in the middle of nowhere. So I figured if anybody wants to off me, I'm in the middle of the desert with a ton of ammo, so they'll be good luck, like, so I shot it that weekend, and that was my way of kind of dropping off grid. My phone was in a Faraday bag that whole weekend. So before the drive out, and I had to just like put it in the hands of the people that were still in the fight without dumping it off on them. I had to trust like my subordinates, like anything else, empower your subordinates to be capable without your direct like micromanaging or helicopter mom tendencies. I had to trust that they could handle it. So what I gained from it was that, like, there is so much power in like sticking together as a people that are like centered around like a core belief system. And like, there's just nothing that can crush that. And like, if we get to talk again, I get to tell you some of the other stories, man, people endured so much. And I know that their strength came from knowing that there was somebody else there that they could call me, or we could call each other, or I could show up for them. Some people had boards of inquiries and I would show up in person. And I know to them that it was like, at a certain point, there was like a little bit of almost a celebrity aspect to it, that they were like, the OG is here, he's supporting me, and I know I'm going to be okay. I know I'm doing the right thing. So like I said, I just learned that like all of our strength comes from each other And, you know, if you were to go dig into like biblical references of things too, these phrases are retyped in different things and printed in every single one of them. And like basically doing more for fellow man than for yourself type of things is like the entire core of the human experience. And I finally got to put that take care of the man you'll never be wrong into practice, and then be rewarded spiritually for it over and over again, more fulfilled, and have a better, you know, quality of life, especially mentally, and improve it for other people. So I've just like really learned like that is the message, and is like that's what I gained from it, is like the community and caring for each other directly has to mean more than my hatred of the government or money or corruption. If that is all that steers me, it will be a kamikaze path. I will destroy myself in the process of doing it. And that's why, like, yeah, Cold Heart, Platoon Sergeant Rob was effective but terminal and killing himself slowly with like the drinking and stress, you know. And now I'm able to have empathy and work harder to build up other people. It's so much more powerful and fulfilling. And it's the only way that I can be now, is like that type of health, you know.
That's a powerful message, man. Powerful, and ties back into that advice that you were given to take care of your men, serve the greater good, serve each other. Dan, man, what a story. I know that we're just scratching the surface on it. I'd love to have you back on and we can cover some of these other things. I wanted to ask you about Seth and have you share his story and some of this other stuff. So if you're willing, I'd love to have you back on and we can kind of pick it up. Thank you for your courage. Thank you for standing up. Thank you for being a leader and for being that positive influence that people need. We're in short supply of men who are willing to put themselves on the line for the benefit of others. And you've done that, and you've made a significant difference, man. So thank you.
I appreciate that a lot. That means a lot. And thanks for your caring enough to hear it, man. Because like I said, people are kind of burned out on the COVID thing a lot, but like what they need to hear is the message of the people, you know, and what we went through, because it will continue to matter. So I appreciate you giving me an opportunity to continue to put that out there.
100%, man. 100%. Thank you again.
Thanks, brother.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Wired for Impact. If you're interested in creating and expanding your impact, be sure to visit us online at impactnow.com.